We begin with John Keats' poem Ode to a Nightingale. It's one of his 1819 odes, meaning it was written during the most prolific year of his life in 1819, when he was still just a young man. And what we see, of course, this is an apostrophe. He's writing an ode specifically to a nightingale, so an apostrophe being a direct address to either an inanimate or absent object of the address, in this case, the predominant figure of nature, obviously the nightingale with its beautiful song, comes to represent throughout the poem several different things for Keats, but most notably, as we'll see, the bird song of the nightingale represents a sort of mystical, supernatural escape for him from the arduous realities of his human existence and consciousness. But we start with a direct phrase here of severe emotional distress. Again, Keats is operating at the Romantic period, in the Romantic period. So heartache, longing, yearning, desire, these sorts of things play heavy roles in the poetry of the Romantics here, of which Keats was one. He says, "My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense." Now, notice already what's going on here, that his senses, his capacities for reason, awareness, consciousness, these things are numbed or dulled into a drowsiness, a kind of non-state. Again, the Romantics privileged the intuition, the imagination, the approaches toward reality that weren't necessarily strictly held into a logical, rational capacity. And here he says, a drowsy numbness pains my sense, which goes back to the idea of being in heartache, that his heart, not his mind, not his will, but his heart, the seat of his emotions, aches, and the numbness pains his sense, as though of hemlock he had drunk. Hemlock being a sort of numbing agent or even poison you would drink to alter your consciousness. He's using the simile there in line 2, that he feels such numb ache and despair that he feels as though he had drunk hemlock, or emptied some dull opiate to the drain. So notice numbness and dullness both being used in the opening lines of the poem, and hemlock and opiate, both mind-numbing, mind-altering drugs. He feels he has emptied them. This will be interesting, the fact that he empties them here, because later on throughout the poem he'll mention fullness quite often, a fullness of experience, a fullness of joy, a fullness of transcendence. Yet he opens with ache, numbness, dullness, and emptiness surrounding his senses and his heart. He says, "As though of hemlock I had drunk or emptied some dull opiate to the drains 1 minute past." It's a very recent feeling he has come into. "And Lethe-wards had sunk." Now here's an interesting allusion to Lethe. Lethe was the river of forgetfulness in mythology, that if one baptized themselves into the rivers of Lethe, he went further into a forgetful, oblivious, lack of conscious awareness or state, which goes along with the idea of numbness and dullness that he's already propounded. So he feels as though he had sunk into the rivers of Lethe. He is desiring a forgetfulness, a numbness to the realities he's facing. Notice the shift. Now he's directly addressing the nightingale. He says, "'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thy happiness." Right, so here's an interesting setup. He is not jealous, he's not envious of the nightingale situation, one of lacking human consciousness, the burden of consciousness that humanity is settled into. He's not envious of the happiness and joy of the nightingale. He is almost too happy, sharing in the happiness of the bird, which brings a separate kind of pain, that you are sharing the joy or sharing the happiness and pleasure of a being that you cannot ultimately be like or commune with. That this is a nightingale, a creature of nature that's separated from humanity. He says, "I'm too happy in thy happiness, that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beechen green, and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. Now notice the contrast here between ease and dullness. Summer being the season of joy, happiness. That is a stark contrasting image away from the heartache, the numbness, the drowsiness that he is feeling to see the nightingale singing in full-throated ease in the heights of summer, seemingly without a worry, seemingly without a care. In stanza 2, he says, "Oh, for a draught of vintage," vintage here alluding to wine. So he is seeking a solution or a resolve to the issues he's brought up in stanza 1 by requesting a draught of wine. Now, this is not an uncommon request for romantic poets to ease the burden of reality, ease the burden of their life with wine. But he asks for a specific kind of wine, and this is where it's interesting. He says, "For a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age," so a preserved wine, an aged wine, but long aged in the deep delved earth. So he's specifically requesting nature's wine. The kind of beautiful, serene wine, the draught of vintage that nature cools, nature ages in its depths. Tasting of flora, he says, and the country green, tasting of dance, tasting of provincial song, and sunburnt mirth. So notice this isn't just any ordinary joy or happiness or laughter, but it's joy that is of nature's producing. This is sunburnt mirth, completely saturated, completely brought upon by the pleasures of nature itself. Long cooled, deep delved in the earth, in the soil itself. Oh, for a beaker full. Notice where we've gone, from emptiness to fullness. Emptiness when he's discussing the conflicts, the problems of his own life, his heart, his senses. And now when we move to a concentration of nature, it becomes full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful Hippocrene. Now this is another interesting mythological allusion. And it's also a river. Which is fascinating because what Keats is discussing here is a kind of fruitful, abundant outpouring of joy, satisfaction, pleasure, transcendent experiences. And it's interesting that he's used two rivers here. One of intense forgetfulness and loss and obliviousness, loss of consciousness, and the other is one of fullness, fullness of inspiration, fullness of artistic revelry, fullness of communion with nature, that Lethe has become the Hippocrene. With beaded bubbles winking at the brim. Notice the rhythmic quality of stanza 2 with the alliteration here. Deep delved, beaded bubbles winking at the brim presents a lyrical quality that we had not seen yet. Purple stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. Now here's where we get interesting language from Keats. He's requesting this draught of vintage, this wine that can provide a means of escape into the beauty of nature, the wondrous quality of nature, away from the troubles of his life, his heart, his senses. And he says, I might drink and leave the world. So he's looking for a direct escape from the waking, conscious world into the supernatural, mystical world of the imagination of nature. And with thee, he says, he wishes to join the nightingale. And remember, he asked this of the nightingale earlier when he said, I am too happy in thy happiness. Now he wishes to join the nightingale in his quest, in his path, and fade away into the forest dim. Notice brightness of summer and the forest dim. He equates brightness, fullness of summer with the nightingale, dimness, of the forest of the world he wishes to leave. He carries on this idea of fading far away, dissolving and forgetting. Remember Letha, he wishes to forget problems, conflicts, turmoil. Keats was a poet fraught with personal conflict. He was ill much of his life, lost many of his family members at an early age, had a loving relationship with a young woman that he could not marry due to his own instability. And so the desire to forget the pains of the real world is a tempting one. But it's this word dissolve and fade. These words, these ideas, present a concept of fading into nothingness that is a fear. And the word for that is oblivion, the French word oubli, meaning nothingness, annihilation almost. That idea will pop up later as well, where he wishes to fade into darkness, to dissolve, to cease his life, which is a radical thought. It goes against religious concepts of the time that one moved from life into death into life everlasting. Here he wishes to simply move from life to death, to dissolve, to end, to forget and cease to be. Quite forget, he says, what thou among the leaves has never known, namely the conflicts and struggles of humanity, the weariness, the fever, the fret. Here, he says, man's world. He says, here men sit and hear each other groan and fret and with fever and weariness, where palsy shakes a few sad last gray hairs. So the tragedy of old age and the consciousness of it. That's the key. It's not just aging. All life ages, but it's aging with the consciousness of aging. Aging and paling, he'll say later, the youth grows pale, spectre thin, and dies. He's speaking of transience, the fleeting nature of human life, that we are born, we live, and we age, and we die, and we never really get to maintain the youth that we are so fond of. Where but to think is to be full of sorrow. So here's some irony, right? He has referenced again fullness, but it's sorrow that he's full of, and that sorrow that he's full of is equated with the act of thinking, the burden of consciousness that plagues all man. He says here, to think is to be full of sorrow, not full of joy, not full of pleasure or song, like he mentioned in stanza 2, full of the true, full of the warm south. It's not pleasure and beauty, it's full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs, that man despairs with eyes that are heavy as lead, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, her beautiful eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Stanza 3, he is mourning and lamenting the fleeting nature of human life and the consciousness of knowing that life is fleeting. The nightingale is not burdened with such things. So in stanza 4, he shifts an imperative to the nightingale to flee, away, away, for I will flee to thee. So the thought of fading away he mentioned earlier in stanza 2 has now become the action he wishes to pursue. I will fly to thee. I will follow thee. And notice he says, not charioted by Bacchus. Now here's another mythological allusion. Bacchus is the Roman god of wine, who was typically depicted as charioted with leopards leading the way. So that's what pards there means. But the point is, he's not saying I will fly to the supernatural world of the nightingale and nature itself through an abundance of wine, through drunkenness. He says not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but rather on the viewless wings of poesy. Now this is an interesting departure for Keats, that he's not content with thinking that wine and drunkenness through wine was enough to flee the conflicts and problems of human reality. Now he's saying it's the wings of poesy, or poetry, that provides viewless wings, a sense of invisible wings that Keats now maintains through the act of poetry and writing poetry to escape, to flee, to run from the burden of consciousness. That it's through the art of poetry itself, not a mind-altering drug or alcohol. Though the dull brain, remember earlier he referenced his brain being dulled, it perplexes and retards. His human brain slows down, becomes confounded, becomes complicated. Already with thee. So he says, even though my dull brain is lacking, it is slow, I feel I am already with you. Tender is the night with the nightingale. The queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by her starry fays. So with thee, with the nightingale, nights are tender. The moon is on her throne, reigning. Moonlight, tenderness of night, the starry skies, these romantic images are enthroned in the world of the nightingale. But here, he says, remember earlier he had said that, here, where men sit and hear each other groan, youth grows pale and so on, he's saying the same thing here. There is no light. Darkness surrounds man's existence. Here there's no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown. The only light comes on the breeze, meaning it is a flickering, unstable, unsturdy sort of light, not moonlight that is ever strong. Here there is no light except what from heaven is blown on the breezes through verdurous glooms and winding, mossy ways. So whatever light can cut through the gloom or the dark and winding, mossy ways. Here there is no light. Here we are surrounded by darkness and confusion, and the only light we get from heaven comes on the blowing of the breezes, a very unstable sort of light. I cannot see, he says. So again, the blindness of man's existence is indicated. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in embalmed darkness. That embalmed darkness, the balming image there is a funeral sort of image. It is embalmed. Yet look at the rest of the stanza. He is forced to interact with the nightingale through other sensory perceptions. I can't see what flowers are at my feet, nor what incense hangs on the boughs, but in darkness he guesses each sweet, wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, mid-May's eldest child, musk rose, dewy wine, flies on summer eves. He is experiencing flight into the natural world, following the nightingale, but it's a blind flight. He is ill-equipped to follow the nightingale into the heart of nature, but the rest of his sensory capacities is trying to notice and guess, estimate the sweetness and wildness of the natural world. In darkness, he says, darkling I listen. So he cannot see, but he can listen to the song, listen to the nightingale. And for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death. So now he is considering or contemplating the prospect of death. As an ultimate escape from the burden of consciousness. He says, I've been half in love with it, with the idea of death. I've called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die. And here's one of the most fascinating, interesting parts of the poem, that Keats, at this point, has praised nature, praised the nightingale's song so much, that he says, now more than ever it seems rich to die. That dying would bring peace, quietness to his breath, easefulness to his life and his heart. Remember earlier, the very first line, he instigates heartache, numbness, pain. My senses are emptied and dulled. And so here, by this stanza, he looks at death as the ultimate richness, the ultimate paradise, tender night. To cease, he says. Remember earlier, the concept of oblivion. when he had said, I wish to fade far away, dissolve. Now he says, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, the easefulness of death, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy that the answer to his numbness is the ecstasy the nightingale pours forth with no pain, perfect ease, and he sees the final linchpin to that trek, that quest in following the nightingale, would result in an easeful death. Which is a frightening thought for us and for Keats, that what if the prospect of death is the ultimate escape into a world of painlessness and easefulness? Yet, he says, were that to happen, still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain. To thy high requiem become a sod. The problem with the concept of death here for Keats is that he would no longer hear the birdsong, which is what is so magnetic for him now. That if I were to die, you would still sing, and I would have ears in vain. I would become a sod. I would dissolve. I would fade into nothingness and would be unable to hear your song any longer. He says, thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. The contrast between the natural world and humanity itself drawn even more. Man was born for death. The nightingale was not. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days. So he presents the nightingale as an image of eternal, lovely nature. Unlike man. Man is not eternal in worldly terms. Keats had already discussed that earlier. The weariness, the fever, the fret, the groaning. Youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies. He says, thou wast not born for death. The voice I hear, the nightingale's voice, was heard in ancient days. Look who he says, by whom. He says, is the rich, the powerful, the emperor, and the clown. So the nightingale is not only an eternal voice and a lovely voice of nature, but one that is meant for all men. Both emperor and clown hear the birdsong. They hear the call of nature. They hear the beauty of transcendent experiences and joy. It's not specific and restricted to a certain class or a certain gender. It is for emperor and clown in ancient days and current days. So Keats in 1819 hears the nightingale, and those emperors and clowns of ancient days hear the same song. The call to transcend the muck and pain of our consciousness here on earth and reach a higher state of beauty. Final two stanzas here. Perhaps the self-same song, he says, concerning the nightingale song, that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when sick for home, she stood in tears amid alien corn. This idea of homesickness and alien corn presents another common human theme that the nightingale sings to. It's not just ageless and eternal, the song of nature. And it's not just for the lame or the powerful or the poor or the rich. It is for all men, and it calls all men home. Those who are in alien land, sick for home, longing for home, it is the song that finds a path through the sad heart. So it's the nightingale song that seems to present hopes and dreams and joys that humanity itself, locked in weariness and aging and weakening, desperately needs. The same song that oftentimes hath charmed magic casements, opened magic windows, in other words, opening on the foam of perilous seas and fairy lands. So it's the very song that awakens the imagination, the magic windows, to open onto perilous seas. So it seems like, up until the last stanza here, where there's a marked shift, Keats is crafting an image of pursuing the nightingale further and further and further into the heart of nature, and discovering along the way what unites man. The old, the young, the poor, the rich, those at exile, and those who are at home, all men seem to be united by the quality of the Nightingale's song, which is one of transcendent joy. That it's a joy that transcends human experience, that seems to lift Keats, at least, if not all of us, out of the burden of human consciousness. But alas, the last stanza here, he says, forlorn, with the exclamation point. The very word is like a bell. So this simile, he's alluding to the death knell, the sound of the funeral procession, the bell to toll me back from thee to my soul self. So he is awakened away from the quest, following the bird, back to reality, but it's a certain kind of reality, one that is lonely and isolated. So he is not amongst the communion of nature any longer. He is not paired with the nightingale any longer. This is a soul self, a lonely, isolated, alienated soul. And he is tolled back by this death knell, the sound of the bell that is forlorn, it is sad, it is sorrowful, and it rockets him back to reality. Adieu, he says, farewell, the fancy cannot cheat. So there's no illusion that can satisfy the pains and ills of modern life. The fancy cannot cheat. It cannot shroud me. It cannot present enough smoke and mirrors to make me believe or make me feel that this kind of quest would last. Reality always comes. We always awake after the dream. The fancy cannot cheat so well as she's famed to do. Deceiving elf, a sprite or a spirit that deceives man. Adieu, adieu, thy anthem fades. There's that word again. We end the poem with an image of fading. He fades past the meadows, over the stream, up the hillside, and now 'tis buried deep. So this death bell, the funeral bell, heralds a burial itself. A buried deep in the valley. In the last two lines, he questions the entire experience of the poem. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Gone is hope. Do I wake or sleep? Notice we've moved from the past tense to the present. Was this whole experience of the poem a vision or a waking dream? Was it real or imagined? Gone is that music, he says. Do I wake or sleep? And the final phrase of the poem is one of the most interesting because it shows us a speaker here in Keats that at the final analysis of the poem, he is really no better than when he started. He opened with the poem with a very serious, severe emotion of heartache, but now he ends with a questioning of his identity, a questioning of his existence. Am I awake or am I asleep? Is the real world more true than the imagined world? Or is it the other way around? How do you experience transcendent joy in the real world as he sees it, one burdened by weariness, aging, loss, pain? How do you experience transcendent joy without escaping wholeheartedly into the imagined world?